Greetings, this is Charles Darwin. Now when I died, as you may have noticed, I lost my British accent. Apparently, however, Emma did not.
No, Charles, I did not.
Well, that does it. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you about the evolution of languages. And the evolution of languages can be studied using some of the same techniques as the evolution of biological species. I'm referring, of course, to phylogenetics or cladistics. In a recent paper that was published in Science a couple years ago, they developed a phylogeny of the Indo-European languages using cognates. And you have to use cognates. These are words that were present in the ancestral language and then have evolved into different forms in the modern languages. For instance, no in English, non in French, nein in German, niet in Russian would be examples of this. You have to use cognates because if you used words that happen to have evolved similarities to one another but were not present in the ancestral language, then you will infer the incorrect phylogeny of languages. This is also true in biological species. So for instance, if you're studying the evolution of vertebrates, you would not want to use the color blue as a characteristic because blue whales and bluebirds evolved their blueness separately. This is a problem in phylogenetics that is known as the problem of words slipping my mind right now. Well, whenever I can't think of something, I look it up in the Encyclopedia of Evolution. And right here in the entry for cladistics on page 72, homoplasy, that's the word I'm looking for. The problem of homoplasy, where you can draw the incorrect conclusion when you find that a certain characteristic is present in different species, but it evolved separately by convergence. Well, let's take a closer look at some of these Indo-European languages. Indo-European evolved into different language families, such as Germanic and Italic and Celtic, and then into species, or individual languages, within these families. Now, biological species are considered separate if they do not successfully interbreed. That is, if they interbreed and produce sterile offspring. Now, this, of course, does not always work. Many species of oak trees can interbreed with one another, and yet they're considered different species. The same problem arises with languages. For instance, the Scandinavian languages. Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish are usually considered separate languages, even though I am told, not from any direct experience, that the speakers of these three languages can understand one another. A similar thing would be with Spanish and Portuguese. Apparently they can, to a certain extent, understand one another, even though these are different languages. So then there are the subspecies, which are mutually intelligible in languages, or can interbreed when you're talking about species, and these would be considered dialects. So for instance, English has many different dialects, and we all know many examples of this. One of them would be the Irish people who speak English have a certain accent, something like this. If I've told you once, I've told you for the 43rd time. Okay, you can understand that. However, you probably wouldn't say it that way yourself. Now, some people wonder if Okie, since I now live in Oklahoma, is a species or a subspecies. And sometimes you think that people who speak with an Okie accent are ignorant or in some other way inferior. But I'm here to tell you that is not true. Y'all think we're ignorant. But I'm here to tell you that Okie has a perfectly respectable evolutionary lineage. Now I'm going to tell you 4 ways in which the Okie dialect has evolved. The first is that we have omitted some of the consonants from our words. Let me give you the first example of this. This is pronounced can I help you. Got that? Can I help you? Now you may have noticed that we leave the L sound out of the middle of help. This is not a sign of some kind of ignorance. You do it with your languages too. For instance, you don't pronounce the L inside of the word walk. You don't say walk or talk. You don't say talk. And we just use the same procedure with our pronunciation of the word help. Can I help you? And we also do it with the word tell. I tell you. We don't pronounce the L's at the end. However, sometimes we do have to pronounce those consonants. And that would be depending on what comes after. And to give you another example, then I'm going to use the French language. Now, I will pronounce French the way the French tell me to because it's their language. But you can't tell me how to pronounce English, because I am a speaker of English, so I can pronounce it however I want to. Take, for instance, a couple of French words. The first one means I live, and the second one means they live. Both of these words is pronounced the same way, habite. They don't pronounce the ENT at the end of the third person plural. So that's one example, where they drop a lot of consonants. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But sometimes they will put a consonant in, even if it doesn't appear to belong. Take these two sentences, for example. The first one, it means they is 12 cows. Il y a 12 vaches. Now, if you make that into a question, is they 12 cows, then that comes out, y a-t-il 12 vaches? Now, where did that T come from? They got a T in the middle of it. That doesn't come from any word. The reason they put that in there is just to make it easier to understand. It's just for reasons of pronunciation. Because if they tried to say, yow, 12 vaches, it would be difficult to understand it. So they put a T in there. Y a-t-il 12 vaches? Got that? So, one of the things is that we omit some of the consonants that may be present in other dialects of English. Second thing is we omit some syllables. Now, syllables ain't always necessary. Just like in biology, some genes aren't necessary in as many copies. Take the amylase gene, for example. Now, if your diet has a lot of starch in it, you're going to need more copies of the amylase gene. If it has less starch in it, then you don't need as many. This has, in fact, been studied with the amylase gene, where the Yakut people of Siberia have more... No, wait a minute. It's the Japanese people who eat a lot of rice and have more copies of the amylase gene than the Yakut people of Siberia. They don't have as many because they mostly eat fruits and nuts and reindeer. So it is that sometimes all of the syllables are necessary, but sometimes they're not. Take these words, for instance. Different. You don't need to say different. Different. You understand what I'm talking about if you say that we have a different way of talking. Another word. Probably. You probably understand what I'm saying, even if I don't use all three syllables. And my favorite example is this one, the word favorite. Another thing we do is we sometimes, this is number 3, we add syllables. And we do this for emphasis in many cases. So, now, why do we do that? Here's an example right there, the word why. It's not really 3 syllables, but we make it sort of sound like 3 syllables. Why do we do that? Well, in many cases, this is for reasons of social and sexual selection. Okay? That it doesn't really serve a functional reason, but it allows us to identify which other people are part of the in-group of the Okies, and which ones ain't, and it also allows us to show ourselves to be attractive to potential mates. So here's some examples of one-syllable words that we draw out into more than one syllable. Grits. Sometimes we eat grits. And sometimes we say he it me. And we do that for 2 syllables because we want to emphasize it. But then sometimes we do it just for sexual selection. Just as in many characteristics of animals, biological species and plants as well have been produced not by natural selection but by sexual selection. The fourth thing is that we change the emphasis in some of our words to be different. For instance, you talk about insurance, Italian, behind, and umbrella. Well, we say insurance, Italian, umbrella, and my favorite word, behind. And so, what about the sexual selection aspect of this? I bet there's a lot of city slicker women watching this video right now. I think, what is that guy smoking? What is up with him? Ew, I don't want anything to do with him. Well, I'm not interested in that. But there's probably some corn-fed mamas that are watching this video right now and think, oh, he's such a man. And he's going to be a real good man. Maybe I should get in contact with him. To which Emma has this to say.
Bleep off.
I guess that takes care of it, don't it? This is Charles Darwin, tally-ho, and amen.